Hello and welcome, my name is Trismegistus and today we're going to be reading through and gardening with the latest Factorio Friday Facts. Friday Facts 414. Spoils of Agriculture. Posted by V. Hello, last week you saw how Gleba looks. It's time to get a glimpse of what you can do there. With the idea of it being a biological planet full of life, it seems reasonable to expect that our engineer is about to harvest some of that. We already have ways of harvesting nature, specifically trees. On Nalvis, we either just hit them with an axe enough times, or, later, our construction robots take care of that friendly forest devastation. I don't quite know why we've got a video of this. I mean, it's just the engineer running up, punching a few trees. Although in this game, interestingly, we do have an axe, whereas most sort of games that involve killing trees, basically, you have to punch them to death. But yes, just the engineer running up, punches a few trees, and then a few construction bots come and sort of finish off the rest, really. So these tools aren't quite up to speed to be a part of a mass production chain in our factories, though. Both of the Nalvis methods are initiated manually, so they're not the best for automation, and the trees don't grow back. So once an area has been harvested, you need to move your operation further. Agricultural Tower. The Agricultural Tower is a new machine unlocked on Gleba. It automatically harvests trees in its range. There are two plants on Gleba which are specifically interesting, as they can not just be harvested, but are also replanted by the tower. Today we'll have a look at one of them. I've just zoomed this out a little bit so you can see the full video, but the caption just says Agricultural Tower, harvesting and replanting a tree. A lot of the things you see here are subject to change. Okay, so if we follow the animation through, basically the arm moves over, grabs an already sort of grown tree, and then plants something in the soil here. We didn't really see this sort of soil type texture in the image, in the video rather, last week. This appears to sit in the middle of the, I don't know what you call them, the shallow seas. I don't think this is the slime mould. It could be. The slime mould was one of the areas mentioned last week, and it sort of looks like that, but also sort of doesn't. And it also sort of seems to blend into water. So I think this is just a patch of shallow water, and it appears that on occasional parts of the shallow water, you have this soil type special land, as it were. And that would appear to be distinct from whatever this is. This is a different type of land, and this is a different type of land too. However, we notice that if this is meant to be the other trees, these are the ones described last week as having stinging fronds, I think, then that appears to sit on a different type of special soil. So this darker green one, I think, is going to be the other type of special soil, but the one we're focusing on this week in this video is this pink fruited one that lives and grows on this sort of lighter green soil material. This is the arm. It's a really interesting design, I must say. It seems to be extendable, as you can see. Can you see it moving inwards as it grabs the tree and plants the extra thing? It then has inserter arms that, obviously now in the game you have filters, but I don't think these are doing any kind of filtering. I think it's just outputting the fruit that you get. But notice that it picks one plant, and these inserters output loads and loads of material. I mean, it's already got one that it's done before that they're emptying when the video starts. But then look at this. They're going... Now, obviously, we don't know what the stack size on these is. But if it's 10, or 12, then this is a lot of fruit that it's putting out onto these from just the one plant. So it appears that the plants are going to be very, very productive, basically. The other thing we see, they will explain later, this is being inserted into the harvester. And they will go on to explain that. In terms of this as a machine, this is... It's a really interesting design, isn't it? You've obviously got something in the middle here that's kind of, I don't know, it sort of looks like it's tending a little farm that the machine has got inside of it. It's almost like a little greenhouse that it's built on top of. You've got a balancing arm here, and then obviously you've got the arm itself, which, as I say, extends and moves out and grabs. So yeah, really interesting design at the very least. Harvesting a plant yields fruit, which can then be processed in an assembling machine into both usable products and seeds. So in this video we see what is presumably the other end of these underground belts. So they're coming out the other way. This is the fruit stacked up on the belt. The inserter arms here are grabbing the fruit, and then this is effectively, I guess, it looks like it's sort of peeling the fruit in a sense. It's certainly giving what looks to be effectively the interior of the fruit going one way, and it just says in the caption, fruit being processed in an assembling machine, resulting in seeds and mash. So this orangey pulp here is mash, apparently. The seeds going the other way are the other thing on the belt. So as we see, it's not really putting out seeds, even though it's putting in the fruit to process, and it is putting out this mash. There appears to be a mismatch, at the very least, between the amount of fruit being put in and the amount of mash coming out. Now, it could be that the mash is produced on a sort of a regular rate, irrespective of how many are in there, but it seems to put in a lot more fruit than it produces mash coming out, which to me, and given that we don't see any seeds coming out, to me suggests that this is a probabilistic thing, that you put a fruit in and there's, let's say, 80% chance of getting a mash, but more importantly, say a 20% chance, it's probably lower, of getting seeds. And that's one of the reasons this arm here is producing so much fruit, because in order to give us a viable number of seeds out of each fruit, we would need to process quite a lot. So I think this is going to be a probabilistic based mechanic. I don't think that's a particularly surprise. It's kind of what you'd almost expect, but certainly we don't see any seeds coming out given the amount of fruit that's being put in. Seeds can then be put into the agricultural tower to seed a new plant. The plant will grow over time, and when it matures, the agricultural tower will automatically harvest it. Each new plant is seeded with a 3-tile gap from each other, resulting in a square pattern. This contributes to the process feeling artificial, like a plantation, rather than just wild nature. The agricultural plants can only be seeded on a very specific tile, so you'll need to obey some environmental conditions. As you can probably guess though, this is Factorio, so we'll for sure let you wreck said environment with special landfill-like soils you'll be able to develop with just a bit of research. I just zoomed out again just so that you can see the full video, and the caption just says larger scale farming using artificial soil. I'll probably zoom back in so you can see it properly, but this is the artificial soil. Initially it looks very similar to the proper soil, as it were. So this is the proper soil here, and it's very similar colour. However, this, and I say, if I zoom in you'll probably see it a bit better, but it has the diagonal cross-hatching that landfill has, so it's clearly a sort of a type of landfill. As it mentions, we've got the seeds coming in, they're being used in the tower, and obviously it's outputting because it's grabbing trees as well, but it's also planting these seeds into the ground. There's a mini one here that I'm not sure you can see, but you can actually see different sizes of them, and it appears to basically plant them, if it can, where it already had them. That's a little odd because in this video it doesn't do that. It plants the mini one in a different position to the one it's harvesting. So I'm wondering if these are perhaps natural trees on this one, that the engineer has just set this up, it harvests one, and then it goes for its natural rigid grid positioning, and that's why it puts it in a slightly different place, because that was slightly off where its grid is maybe. But here we can sort of see a grid-like structure. It's a little difficult to tell, and because the trees are so organic and wiggly shaped and all that sort of thing, they don't feel very rigidly on a grid, but you can just sort of see that, as in you've got one there, one there, one there, where there. So it's a natural sort of tile distance between each of these trees. But say because they're so malformed, they do seem to go in different places. I'm assuming with it being an arm that it has a maximum range, and that therefore defines a square or a circle. It'll be interesting which shape it does use, because that will affect the tiling of these machines. And it will be interesting to see if you can kind of overlap them to sort of get more space out. So if I put another one of these, say here, but I offset it, because if it's a 3x3 grid, I can offset another machine. Will it squeeze another one in? Will it ignore the fact that there's one there and it'll put one in next to it, and you can increase the density? My assumption is not, that effectively they'll just fight with each other, and that for the same space, and there's a minimum separation, so it won't put another plant in right next to it. It would look for a 3-tile gap, and say they will kind of fight with the space if you overlap them. You can sort of, so let's zoom into this one a little bit so you can see some of the detail a bit more. I may be imagining things, but it looks like on this top plant here that it's actually growing, that you can actually see bits being added to it. It seems to stop part of the way through, which is interesting. But initially, I'm pretty sure this starts quite low. We'll have to wait for the video to loop again. Yeah, so if we start, this is where the little plant bit is starting at the sort of height that it's at. And if you watch the video as it goes, I'll try not to move my mouse cursor, you can actually see that the bit on the end increases in length. So it looks like the plants will kind of dynamically grow little bit by little bit, rather than, because what they could do is they could simply transition to a new image every time the plant has grown, say 10%, it just sort of fades into a new one. But it looks like they will have an organic growing cycle. That sounds like it would be a nightmare to animate. So I'm wondering if maybe that's linked to the stuff we've seen recently about how they're changing some of the way it does graphics. So I'm wondering if it's more of a dynamic system rather than a set of, sprites sort of thing. So yeah, that's interesting. This, hopefully you can see it better in this zoomed in version. The soil has the cross hatching on it like it's landfill, so clearly that's the differentiator between artificial stuff and real stuff, or natural stuff. My assumption is we can only plant or build this a bit like normal landfill, that you can only build it on water, so you can only build this here, which means that these shallow bits of water are effectively your growth areas, and they're the only places you'll be able to grow the trees on, basically, other than natural outcroppings of them. Those are your sole area for growing trees, effectively turning shallow water into your resource patches, but infinite ones essentially. Biochamber. Every planet we have presented so far has a unique crafting structure. Here on Gleba, it is the Biochamber. It is used to process all of the plant fruits into more industrial products like carbon fibre or a mysterious material we call Bioflux. But more on that later. And here it is. The caption just says a tiny bit of biochamber processing. And in case you weren't clear, this is the biochamber here, this sort of tank structure with a kind of like filtration or fermentation type thing out the back. Now, what we can see going on here is a bit of a mystery because we don't know what all of these things are. We have seen the orange blobs, I think that's the mash as it called it, but we've then got a white stuff here and a green stuff here, and then these are outputting materials onto the belt. The one thing we have seen before that we know what it is this white thing here, which is plastic. Okay, so this is a direct confirmation that the bioreactor, and it does say in the text, so this isn't even a guess by me, is able to produce bioplastic or just plastic. But in terms of what else is going on here, don't know, basically. So a lot of this is going to be guesswork. But yeah, this is the new machine in action. Now, this isn't the machine I was expecting, and neither is the arm thing. So if we go back to the post, I always go back to the original teaser, we have this green building here, and that is neither of the two buildings on Gleba. So is this the building that's exclusive to Aquila? Because so far we have seen that occasionally there is an additional building. For example, so Falgora has the lightning tower, the lightning rods, and that's obviously, well, as far as we know, unique to Falgora, in that if you put it anywhere else there's no lightning, so it's not going to do anything. Whereas the processing building, the EMP and the foundry, can be used elsewhere, although it has to be built on the specific planet. So is this actually Aquila, or are we just going to find out that this is also Gleba in a later Friday Facts, like it's just coming up later on? But yes, interesting, it's not this building. However, I do believe it is the one that was teased in this Friday Facts. Now, I'm going to have to zoom this in, and it'll be above my head because of how it zooms. So hopefully you can sort of see that. It's not easy to zoom in, it's so tiny. But this was an old Friday Facts where in the corner, I think it was Erendor was posting this one, that we got sneaky pictures of what we believe to be the exclusive processing building. So we had at the top there, we had the centrifuge, which we believe to be exclusive to Nalvis. We've got the foundry, which we know was Volcanus. We've got the EMP there, which we know was Falgora. The middle one then is Gleba, because I believe that if you look at that really closely, okay, so it's got a sort of tank thing on the side, and it's got what turns out to be a like a fermentation, like a thing here, and then you've got a couple of pipes on the bottom, you've got something poking out the top as a sort of connecting pipe. So that is, I believe, the bioprocessing plant, or whatever they called it, Biochamber. So this one again, I still believe that's the one teased on this image. I still believe it's that one. But that to me suggests that the people were theorising that these were effectively in kind of distance order or proximity or visiting order effectively for the real game. You've got Nalvis, you've got Volcanus, you've got Gleba, you've got Volgora, and then you've got Aquila. So this again tends to suggest that this is the Aquila building. But we will have to see. And what the heck it could be then, I really don't know. The other thing that this does just confirm, just to note, is that it is the same size and assembler. I think that might be effectively why the assembler is there. I'm sure it's doing something, but this is kind of confirming that the size of this is identical to an assembler. So we've ended up with a 5x5, a 4x4, and a 3x3, I think, as the processing buildings on the intermediate planets. I might be wrong on that, I might be misremembering the size, but I think we've got a really big one, a medium-sized one, and a normal-sized one. So these will be obviously packing in a much more densely, but it's obviously a 3x3 building. The quirk of the biochamber is that it needs to be fed nutrients to operate. Unlike the foundry and electromagnetic plant, the biochamber isn't really used for any Nalvis recipes. But it has its own set of recipes which basically replace oil processing on this planet. Spoilage. All this time, you're probably asking yourself, or already posting messages about it before reading further, what are the weird white lines in the images above? Now, I didn't mention these because I knew this was coming, having read it before, but if we look at... which one shows it best? I guess here, these fruits have a line underneath, a white line underneath, which is weird, basically. We've not had anything else that does that before. And you notice it also has white lines on these mash as well. I didn't see white lines on the seeds, but there's a kind of probably a reason for that. But yes, so we have white lines now. What do white lines mean? Now we're getting into what makes Gleba really special. When fruit is harvested, or most other biological products are made, it will eventually spoil, which turns it into a new item we call spoilage. And this is just the spoilage icon here. I think like most resource type icons, it'll have lots of different variations of shape. But this is the spoilage icon here, which just looks like a sort of a lump of degraded biomatter, basically. This process is inevitable and can't be delayed. However, different items have different spoil times, ranging from about 2 hours to mere minutes. This means that there are ways to control the mechanic and optimise for getting a less spoiled product in the end. And here we just see a belt of material, and the caption says, organic items eventually turn into spoilage. And if you look every so often, there is a spoiled item on this belt, and the other items have the lines underneath. I can't really pause this version of it, we'll just pop over and I'll show it more clearly. So this is just the video popped out so that I can pause it. But if you notice underneath some of these, the white part of the line is larger or smaller. So there's one right there. This green cube, whatever green cube is, has a very, very short remaining time until it spoils. And then some of the others have much longer times, and there's a lot in between. These spoilages then are presumably items that have passed that expiration date, and then have turned into spoilage. Spoilage itself does not appear to have a spoilage line on it, so it's not going to go through some weird cycle of respoiling. But everything else on this belt has a spoil line, basically. So if these are all of the organic, like raw products, as I suspect them to be, then we will be able to see from the line how long each takes to spoil, and apparently they have different spoiling times. The reason why you're optimizing for a better product is because recipe results inherit their freshness from the ingredients. This means that when you craft a product out of a 30% spoiled ingredient, the product will also be 30% spoiled. Caption on the next video just says, you can't serve a fresh salad with mouldy lettuce either. And we see 3 bioplants doing this, basically. So they are taking a range of spoiled levels of ingredients. Although I say it's a range, it looks like these are all very similar. But we've got the white one, or well, a white one, a sort of a green glowy one by the looks of things. And then we've got the actual green science pack. I don't know what it's called yet, but the green science pack being output, and this has a spoil time. Okay, so science packs from Gleba will have a spoilage. But as we can see, what it's demonstrating basically is that these aren't any of these fresh, so none of your science packs are fresh either. Effectively, the spoilable items need to be perceived as temporary, and it's the throughput that matters, while in contrast, buffering a stockpile isn't helpful at all. When we were considering the idea of timed life for items, one of the first questions was whether they should just disappear or turn into something. If they just disappeared, it would be more convenient, as you wouldn't need to worry about the piles of spoilage you're inevitably going to accumulate. But you wouldn't know that something had spoiled, as there would be no traces of it. That's why spoilage exists, and we have multiple methods to get rid of it. You can burn it, waste it in a recycler, or create nutrients that are already half spoiled. And here we see the 3 examples of that, all 3 examples. Just says 3 examples of getting rid of spoilage. The way that's written, I don't know if that means there are other ways of getting rid of it as well, but yes. So at the moment we know about 3 ways of getting rid of it, which is just to burn it as a fuel, to put it in a recycler, which doesn't give you anything other than getting rid of the items. So recyclers, interestingly, are both, a way of producing, getting more quality items out of a certain volume of material, but they're also a way of getting rid of stuff then. I hadn't really ever thought of them like that, but yes, you can basically put something like this into a recycler, and because it spits out less than you put in, effectively you're just disappearing the items, which is weird. I'm hoping or assuming this comes with a massive pollution cost, that the spoiled items, or certainly items that you're getting rid of, become pollution, and that these are really nasty for biter attacks, basically. The last one here then is turning it into what it describes as nutrients. We'll get back to that in the speculation, but it looks like you can effectively recycle them, although the thing you get out is heavily spoiled, basically. So these are coming in as, these don't have spoilage, so they're 100% fresh, as it were, the maximum freshness, and the thing coming out here is only half the nutrient, it's half spoiled already. It also looks a bit to me like this is a net loss, so you're not just converting it to one of these, you're putting in quite a lot of them in order to get one, by the looks of things. So I think this is like a net, it uses up more spoilage than you get, and what you get is already half spoiled. So you could leave it on the belt and then it just picks it up again. You could downcycle it in that way, and maybe pull off a little bit of nutrient every so often if you really needed it. To avoid this mechanic being over the top and to allow meaningful decisions to be made, there are some items where their freshness doesn't contribute to the final product, as the final product is something that isn't spoilable. On the other hand, the new agricultural science packs do spoil, which reduces their value for research, so you will be incentivized to try to bring home the freshest science packs you can. Okay, so 2 things there. First off, and we kind of saw this in the plastic one, I think. It appears like you can turn off that indicator because some of these don't have the spoiling on. I'm assuming that's basically saying something like plastic doesn't have a spoil, basically. So it's just permanently plastic, which would make a lot of sense if you're taking these things off of Gleba and using them somehow. Get into that in speculation. But, or the plastic that's coming out, even if you're just whacking it in a space age thing, or you're turning the plastic into something else, none of that will have spoilage on it. So you don't need to worry that your red circuits are going to spoil, basically. However, they have made the decision that the green science pack, which is apparently just called agricultural science pack, bit of an odd name, does spoil. Okay, and what it says there is that it will reduce with the value of the research. To me, what that's saying is that it, rather than say a recipe uses 10 green science packs, just as a number, if you only give it 10 half-spoiled science packs, that only counts as 5 science packs. That it's some kind of mechanic like that, because the phrasing of that is interesting, but I'm not 100% sure what it means. I say we'll kind of pick that up in speculation. There are some items and recipes with spoilable ingredients which need to be crafted on different planets. So on top of optimizing the production chain, it'll also be meaningful to make a fast space platform to deliver them. The main tools for manipulating spoilables are inserters, with a new ability to prioritize the freshest or the most spoiled items when picking up from inventories and filtering out spoilage with splitters. Design journey. Over the time we've been developing the Gleba gameplay, it went through some drastic changes. Initially, we had about 10 plants which were harvested directly into items like plastic or sulfur, but it just became very broad but shallow and tedious as a result. It is worth noting that it wasn't very interesting either, as that's basically how mining drills work. Instead, we've reduced it to 2 plants to cultivate, and their fruits are processed into a much wider variety of items, also in much higher volumes, which restored the feeling of building a factory in the way we know and love. The seeds are not only useful for new plants, but also for creating biochambers and the seedable soil tiles, so there's some decisions to be made where you invest them. Conclusion. All in all, we are confident that the gameplay of Gleba is different enough to be interesting. It builds on similar enough principles to feel familiar and, well, actually be fun. The visuals are still subject to change, along with improvements to some effects. The graphics of the new machines you can see here come primarily from our usual suspects Erindel on concept art, with Jersey taking care of the 3D pipeline. The agricultural tower has a very long telescopic arm, much longer than any other legs or arms, which resulted in being very technically demanding to make, both for Jersey and for Lou breaking their brains with the drawing code. The biochamber was more straightforward, but Jersey had a field day with his crazy geometry node simulations. There are a lot more details to be shared, but those will be easier to digest when you have the game in your hands and or in some later Friday Facts. I think that's saying, or kind of confirming or just like reassuring us that they're not going to tell us everything, basically. So that's my interpretation of kind of what that's saying, that basically some of this stuff we're just not going to find out about until we actually get the game. Although some of it is also going to be covered in Friday Facts, which is good, because I want there to be surprises and stuff I just didn't expect to be popping out of nowhere. As always, bring your half-spoiled fish to the market of opinions. Crikey, where to start on this one? I guess let's start with the look of things, how they look. I really like the soil. I wasn't expecting that would be really something that I would kind of say, but I really think this is quite effective, this green, like luminous green style and the sort of darker green style for the soil. And I think this kind of works with the hashing on it. It's a little indistinct in a way, but it does sort of work. The trees is interesting to see. It's also interesting they call them trees. They're not really what I would call trees. They're sort of plants, really. And it's interesting that it's going to be these stingy, frondy ones that are the other type of plant, I think, because they are on this darker green surface. Presumably they give the other product, so we get the orange mash out of these guys, and maybe it's the green cubes or something, although the green cubes has a feeling that it's processed. So whichever it is out of these products, I'm guessing one of them comes out of one tree and one comes out of the other. So there's that. In terms of the machines, I really like how the arm looks. I'm not so keen, and it does say it's work in progress, and it's this thing, as always, of it's very easy to get into the thought process of this is how it looks finally, but you literally just saw it happen there. When it grabs the tree, it just like literally disappears, and then it's planting this without holding anything. So you've got this lovely arm thing on it. The arm doesn't do anything. It just hits the tree and then hits the soil, and magically the tree disappears and magically the thing goes. So I'm assuming when it talked about effects being changed, that's what they're talking about, that there's going to be a bit of a planting animation in some way, because this is just a bit sort of sudden in a sense. It's a bit sort of bang, it's gone, bang, it's here, and it's got a nice arm on it. So let's have a little bit of a tweaky grabby animation, even if it doesn't have the thing in its hand. Also, this being a kind of, I don't know what you call it, a sort of a greenhouse or something like that. I guess the idea is that it puts the seeds in this greenhouse and grows them into little plants. So, germinates them in this greenhouse, and then this thing, sort of sucks them up in the middle and plants them. So yeah, it's all very sort of very Factorio, if you see what I mean. And also, I mean, this is this point again that these are work in progress graphics, because you notice this how this is over the top of the hood on the underground here. So that's the type of thing I know that I think we're seeing stuff that is like just been put in the game type of thing maybe, and it's not properly integrated, because I'd expect these to have some, maybe a little bit of animation or something for some of them. Certainly this guy here, it feels like some of these should have movement like they are sort of trees as well. The actual bioreactor, I'm going to be 100% honest, it's a little underwhelming. I really like... I think part of my problem with it is the bit that looks the coolest is like hidden by this, which I think is this, this chamber here that's doing it. It's kind of a bit hidden by the reflectiveness of the glass. If it was a bit more see-through, we can actually see more gloopiness going on. I think I'd be kind of a bit more impressed by that. I'm also hoping that... Is that slightly different? I was going to say that there would be different colours on it. Like the chemical plants currently have different colours, fluids floating around, that we get a similar sort of thing, but I'm thinking there maybe is a subtle difference, but it's very subtle. Because certainly this bit here, this looks orange and this looks maybe more greeny yellow. But it could do with a bit more variety for what it's processing. Maybe this should be as extreme as being this is white if it's doing this plastic, and this should be, well, orange is fine, I guess, or whatever. But there's not a lot of visual difference between these at the moment. Like, when you've got a bunch of chemical plants, you can tell what they're doing because they're brightly coloured fluids. On these, can you really instantly see what the difference is between those two is? Obviously, they have alt mode on and that, but they're not visually that distinct doing different recipes. So it could do with a little tweak colour there. But I guess the other thing is, I assume that this is effectively backwards, that you can rotate it round so that the filtration type tank part of it, that pool that it's churning round can be on the front. Because again, you seem to be losing a lot of the animation. In fact, maybe you can't, because we haven't really seen any of the buildings being sort of rotated round with looking different. It feels like we're getting the boring side of this building, if I'm honest. It looks like the interesting stuff is going on behind it. See, I like the look of it. I think it really looks very Factorio, but it's a bit plain. It's a bit like the assemblers are very perfunctory. If you ever sit and watch the actual things and stuff moving around, they are quite intricately animated. But it is just a flat box with, some cogs moving up and down, basically. And this is a bit similar, whereas the EMP and the Foundry have really, dynamic animations. As I say, I hope we can turn it round and we can see like the other side of it, and we can see the tank in front of it and all that sort of thing. Because, yeah, I'll be honest, it's a little bit dull. I don't like saying that, obviously. It looks fine. It's not going to be a problem. I'm not going to not get the expansion because I think this is a little bit plain. But as I say, maybe just the addition of, make this bright pink and this bright blue and this bright grey or whatever. And I think that'll add quite a lot to it. I suppose there is a little bit of a compromise there, though, in that with it being a smaller building, you're going to build a lot more of them, presumably, in a certain space. So maybe there's an element of not being too complicated in the animation. The oil foundry doesn't have an animation, and I think as a building that looks fine, but it could really do with one. But it's got the flame sort of shooting out of it, but that's it, sort of thing. So maybe it's good to have a few that aren't as spectacularly animated. But as I say, this is a little plain for me. Right, let's sort of rip the bandage off and address the spoiled elephant in the room. We're getting a decay mechanic. How do I feel about that? In all honesty, I'm not sure. I said last week that I wasn't going to be a fan if we were getting a survival mechanic or multiple survival mechanics. This is in that ballpark, and so I am unsure. I like that there is some kind of system for kind of managing spoilage, of like recycling it or reusing it or that sort of thing. That's nice to have. That feels quite Factorio. The fundamental mechanic of things have a lifetime, not sure about, if I'm honest. I don't think I hate it. I don't think my reaction is an instantaneous nope, don't like it, like a lot of people have for quality. I think I'm going to have to play with it to really understand if I'm a fan or not. One of the things that... So in modern logistics, you have something called just-in-time delivery, which is where you design and try to deliver the thing that is needed at the exact time that it's needed. So if you need a particular part for something, that part is delivered to where it needs to be at the exact time that you're about to use that part. The idea is to stop buffering, to stop, well, it's not really called buffering, but it's to storing things basically, so that you don't have to have every single building has a whacking great warehouse because you only get a delivery of these parts every 6 months, and that's got to last you for 6 months. That's not the idea of a lot of modern logistics. And so it's nice in a sense that Factorio is getting an element of that. That is a logistical challenge in the real world. If something turns up, like particularly if it's organic, if you're trying to make some food product and you need your milk or your whatever, what have you, to be there at exactly the right time, and that you don't have to store millions of gallons of it and some of it goes off anyway. It's nice that that is being an element that's being captured in Factorio from a purely sort of intellectual point of view. From a gameplay point, it's quite radical because a lot of players play, well, even I tend not to buffer. I don't tend to use buffering other than trains. I don't tend to put things in chests and just store loads of items in a chest, and all of my belts have buffers in and all that sort of stuff. However, a belt itself is a buffer, okay? Particularly when you have a great big bus system where you've got, say 8 lanes of iron, 8 lanes of copper, 4 lanes of gears, these sorts of things. They effectively act like a massive buffer, and it's a buffer with a sort of infinite lifetime. Whereas what we're getting something here is that if you are not literally putting something on and then taking it off within a fairly short time period, and some of these things it says has minutes of lifetime, then that's a waste of that material. A buffer in a lot of these is going to be pointless, okay? Which is going to be interesting, because that means you can't just stick it on a belt at one end of your factory and pick it off of the belt at the other end of the factory, because by the time it's got there, it could have spoiled and be useless. Now, we are getting a super fast belt that makes that a bit more practical. But fundamentally, you can't have it sitting on a belt because it will spoil. They do very explicitly state as well, and I can imagine this being something that comes in with a mod. I guess for me, it's whether a mod is something of this that I would play with, that there is no refrigeration mechanic or no extending the lifetime. Where does it say that? Here you go. So it says, this process is inevitable and can't be delayed. However, different items have different spoil times, ranging from about 2 hours to mere minutes. So, this to me is very explicitly saying that we will not get any kind of refrigeration or storage, lifetime extension mechanic. What we could get, I guess, would be maybe one of the infinite researches allows, just blanket increases spoilage time, maybe. That could be something that they maybe do. But to me, this is pushing it down the route of very small, very dedicated factories where the, whatever you call it, the plantation is next to the processing, is next to the end product production. And that you have to build that in such a way that it's timing balanced. So basically you need to work out how many fruits you're going to get per minute, how many of those how many assemblers, isn't it, to like crush them or what have you, to process all of those in the required time, and then how many products you can make of that, and getting rid of those products. How can you push those products away? And obviously then circuit mechanics come in, because if you filled up whatever chest you've got here, you're not got any demand for this, you need to tell that picker to not pick items. So you need to have well put together circuit networks in order to control a lot of that. But as I say, it is very nice at the least to have a mechanic for kind of recycling the spoilage. This does feel very, or reusing or burning it or what have you, this does feel very Factorio, and I like that aspect. But as I say, whether or not this is a mechanic that I'm going to get on with, I think I'll have to find out, because what I'm referring to basically is that in a lot of survival games, you'll make or I guess you'll kill the animal, you'll get its meat, that meat will spoil. You'll turn it into a foodstuff, that foodstuff will spoil. But a lot of survival games then give you tools like fridges and curing and those sorts of things that allow you to extend the lifetime of that product and maybe even make it infinite. So we're not getting that, is the point. So we are set to a certain time frame for our items to spoil. That then impacting the science pack, and the science pack has a spoilage time, is really pushing this to the extreme in a sense that, I mean, that is quite radical. We know that the intended mechanic for the new planets is that they're not just mining outposts, they are dedicated factories. You are forced to build an actual factory on that planet, and that the major output from that planet will be the science pack. You then take that science pack and you take it to wherever you got your central science, and you do science with it there. So what this is literally introducing is that just-in-time logistics I was talking about, that you are producing these science packs. If you want to get the most out of them, then you have to transport them. Well, you have to produce them quickly, and you have to transport them on a fast machine, a fast platform that gets them to where they need to be doing science, and you have to have that science going to be used as quickly as possible, otherwise the things will spoil. Now that's great from one point of view, because it will introduce a mechanic that is, how fast can I make these? Is it better to have an incredibly fast platform that can only carry 100 sort of thing, or is it better to have a slightly slower one that carries 1,000? It's not going to be good to have one that's huge that carries 1,000,000, because by the time it's filled and by the time it gets there, you will probably have spoiled all your science packs or degraded them to the point that they're useless. But what then does spoilage mean for the actual science packs? Obviously we know, and we have seen, these science packs have a spoil point. First question, I guess, is when they are spoiled, does that mean they are useless? They turn into spoilage. That's what it seems to be saying. So it's not that they become 1% effective once they are at the end of their lifetime. They become spoilage and they are useless. You have produced science and transported science that you cannot use for science, which, as I say, is quite a radical thing to be doing. But what does a 50% spoilage on a green science pack actually mean in practice? Because at the moment, we know that a recipe, for example, might use 1,000 of, say, red, green, blue, and pink science, something like that. Pink being the Holmium one, sorry. That might be a requirement for a recipe, and that's what it uses. It takes each one 30 seconds. Each iteration's at 30 seconds, say. So if you put in, if that's actually a green science pack, bright green science pack, and you want to do that same research with 1,000 that requires 1,000 green science packs, if the science packs you're putting in for the green one are half spoiled, what does that mean? Because it says it reduces their value for research. So to me, what that's saying is that if you require 1,000 to do all of that research, you put in 1,000 50% spoiled science packs, it will only effectively do 500 science. Okay, so that effectively a spoiled science pack, you know how when you grab items and they're like laser turrets, if they're like if you pick up 5 laser turrets that are 20% damaged, it will stack them in such a way that becomes one laser turret. And I think that's what it's doing. So in order to get that one science pack, it needs to put in partial spoiled science packs in order to reach that one. So in other words, how that will actually work in practice is you've got 1,000 in a chest that are 50% spoiled. I think it will put them in, keep putting them in order to build it up to that, like, effectively 100%. So in other words, every time it does a cycle, it will put 2 in to take it up to 100%. When it's putting them into science labs, what does that mean? Is it stacking, like I said, and then it eventually fills up to 100% worth of a proper science pack, and then the science goes? Or does it run at 50% speed? Or what does that actually do on that science lab? Because one of the things that's interesting about this as well is that, what does that mean for things stacking in chests? In particular science packs. If I've got a 1% spoiled, 2% spoiled, 3% spoiled, I'm assuming it actually works in 10% increments. But, you know, a 54% spoiled, a 39% spoiled, a 63% spoiled, those are all different levels of spoilage. So if you stick them all in a chest, does it all just sort of aggregate them together and make, say, 4 100% unspoiled science packs? I don't think that's how it'll work, because that would be a way of cheating it. You would be able to just stick them into a chest all the time, and with your inserters, pull out fully intact 100% packs. So in other words, every single one of those at a different spoilage level will take up a slot in a chest. And I think that's why they're giving us a mechanic to pull out items of a different spoilage level, because you can tell it, pick them, the most spoiled first and use them up, basically, because they're about to go out of date, and then pick the next spoiled as you go through the recipe. That would also potentially tie into, we saw in a previous Friday Facts, we're getting a new combinator that has like ranking systems that allows you to do stacked items. So having something that you can tell the inserter, always pick out the thing that's at the bottom or the top, well, that's probably built in. But if you want the 50% spoiled one all the time, then, or you want to limit it, don't go below 50%, then having something that ranks things feels like a way of kind of achieving that in circuit network logic. So I guess to talk about the processing, the material you're processing, etc., as I said before, my interpretation is that it's going to be this frondy plant that is the other tree. That's not necessarily the case, so that's my assumption, but not necessarily the case, because we see also that this is a type of soily material, and that this, you remember the really horrible one with the pokey out things, could also be a tree, and it could also be that. So that's another possibility, that it's not necessarily this plant that's the tree, that it's this plant that's the tree, and that the other soil is this sort of intermediate green rather than the dark green. So I think it's probably this one, but you never know. But we don't really see either being processed. What we do see is the assembler, like shelling the red fruit and getting what it calls mash, okay, seeds and mash. We know that seeds are used in the production of this soil, the artificial version of that, because it's something we're told. They also appear, from what it says, to be used in the production of these, which would make sense, that you can build this greenhouse thing, and that needs a few seeds, and also the bio reactors, biochambers require the seeds as well. So those, I think, are probably going to be the main uses of seeds. The fact that you've got seeds and that those don't spoil, yes, so we see it here, and these are on the belt and don't have the line, and it's not because the line is turned off, the line is shown on the actual fruit being harvested. So clearly the seeds do not have spoilage. So does that mean that we can plant these trees on other planets? Now, I'm thinking we probably can't. I think we might be able to, in theory, lay down the soil. You might be able to put this green soil on Nauvis. I don't think you'll be able to plant the trees. The reason I think that is I think it goes back to all the way back to the little reveals of the planets having particular, like, planetary conditions. So there was pressure, there was, what else was there? Was temperature one of them? I think that that's effectively a way of controlling us planting these on other planets. Because, well, I mean, you couldn't plant them on Vulcanus for one thing, because you don't have water. You can't plant them on Fulgora because you don't have water. Nauvis, you got loads of water. Okay, now it's deep water, so it could simply be restricted like that, and that you can only build this special soil in shallow water. That could be a very easy way of mechanically preventing it. But as I say, my feeling is probably we technically could plant this in, because it's just landfill, it's just a type of landfill. We could plant it on Nauvis. We won't be able to grow the trees because they require the particular climatic conditions that are only found on Gleba. Okay, and that perhaps is why we saw things like pressure and stuff like that. Perhaps Gleba has a really low pressure atmosphere, whereas everywhere else has high pressure atmospheres, so it just crushes the plant. They can't survive. Okay. If we can build these or grow these trees on other places, what does that mean? And conversely, I think we can't, But could we use this to build forests? Could we plant forests on Nalvis, like normal forests with normal trees? I don't think we can, because I think the way that this is phrased, the initial introduction, is basically saying, it literally says both of the Nalvis methods are initiated manually, so not best for automation, and the trees don't grow back. So once an area has been harvested, you need to move your operation further. So I think that's saying there will not be seeds coming out of regular trees. You can't plant your own forests. But prime territory for mods, I think, that there are a lot of mods that do organics, that do, like greenhouses and various things already. They tend to be fudged into a way of making it work in the current version of Factorio. I think this is opening up the prime possibility for a forestry machine that plants forests on Nalvis, which would be hugely cool, I think, particularly for those of us who like aesthetics and that sort of thing. So yeah, I don't think that is something we will be able to do in the base game, but I think that's prime territory for a mod. Anyway, the point I was going to really get to in this speculation is that out of this red fruit, all we seem to get is the orange mash. Now, what we also see on the belts here, and I can pop it out to a separate video where it's paused, which is this one. So we see the orange mash on the belt here. We've also got bright green cubes and a kind of a white powder stuff. Now, we obviously don't know whether this bright green cube has been through a process at all. Okay, I suspect it has. What I suspect is going on here, what my speculation is the white stuff, the white powdery type one, because that looks like more like a pile of stuff that would come out, and that this is what it calls the nutrients, I think, as in this is effectively like calcite is on Volcanus, where it is the enabler of doing stuff, essentially. Because one of the things that's interesting, I would say, about this particular assembler, let's just play this one through. If you look at what this one is doing, right, all it's doing is taking the orange ones and some of the white ones and turning it into more white ones. Okay, so I think that this is perhaps something where we get, because it's then looping round, I don't know if you can tell, the underground here is going through. Yeah, so it's putting this stuff on the belts. It's then got a feed off for like an excess, but that's coming off there. We've also then got, I think this is looping this round here, so I think this underground that comes in here is then merging this into a belt. And so effectively they're trying to keep this belt full, because clearly the bright green, the orange, the mash, and the white thing are all used in the production of plastics. That is the recipe for them. So I think perhaps what you can do, because it only picks up the orange ones in this machine, and that perhaps the green one is effectively an intermediate. Yeah, because this is doing a little circuit. It's weird how it's cut off. I don't know what we're not being shown there. But it basically, and I think this is basically, doing that job. Well, I don't know what that one's doing actually. That one seems to be taking something else in, using an assembler, and also putting it onto the white belt, the white powder belt. So yeah, anyway, I think this probably is the nutrient stuff, and you've got to feed that in. That effectively is like coal in a burning mine, a burner phase of the game, that every single process uses this white stuff. But yeah, I think the green one is a process material, just simply because it looks like it's probably processed. If you were harvesting a plant of some description, you would be staggered, I think. It could obviously be a placeholder, but to get a bright green cube out of it, perfectly formed bright green cube, would be a bit weird. And so that feels like that's maybe an intermediate, that perhaps you squish, two of the orange ones and one of the white one together to get a green one, and that then you can take a green one, an orange one, and a white one and make some plastic. I would not be surprised if it was a ratios thing. So it's not on Gleba perhaps about, because the oil is the focus. Obviously, we'll be making iron plates and steel and all that sort of stuff, probably in the usual ways. But it's saying that the oil processing is entirely replaced by these machines and these processes. So I wouldn't be surprised if it's a case of, put, say, 2 orange ones and a green one into a bioreactor and you get plastic. Put 3 orange ones and 2 green ones, and obviously you need the white ones as well. And you get sulfur and put in, what is the other products? I guess like solid fuel and things like that you can put those in different numbers. If you put 10 in one of these in and one of those, then you get this. And it's basically like recompacting and recompiling things in order, because if you think it's a bioreactor, it's just sat there, churning away, doing its biology, and whatever microbes it's got in it is what it produces as an output. And so if you feed it particular things, it grows different microbes, and that produces different things for you. So I have a suspicion it's probably something like that. Because one of the things that's very interesting on these, these designs is they don't appear to have a fluid connector. There's not an obvious place. It could be on the end here, yeah, but it doesn't look like it. That looks like a pressure chamber to me. But these don't appear to have a fluid connector, okay? So that suggests that you won't need like water in order to get anything to work, because, there's no obvious connection point for a fluid for them. The other thing we do see on this belt here is this sort of orange spiky thing. I am wondering if maybe this orange thing is the other product, basically, the orange spiky thing, because that looks much more organic, and that the white powder is basically like almost like a decomposed version, or a sort of if you imagine drying out an organic thing, it becomes like a powdery dust. I think that might actually be it, but it's very difficult to guess. And so maybe this orange spiky thing is the product. So I'm not going to subject it to it. I've just skimmed through this video and looked at the images here. The tree with the pink fruits on it is not shown in any of these images, okay? None of these have that in it, including the video. So the video isn't there either. So I'm actually now wondering, reviewing that, if all of these plants shown here are more decorative. They might, as I was speculating last week, have some environmental effect, that these things damage you in some way. But in terms of being this tree that you can harvest, I'm actually now wondering if we've just not seen the second tree, and that the first tree is the one with the pink blobs on it here, and it's not this guy that you can harvest and not that guy. It's something we haven't seen yet. And that therefore maybe this sort of spiky fruit that comes out of it is the other product. And that would then tie up with the powdery stuff being, as I say, that you dry out either of those. You can make both of them into it, and that then acts as like a nutrient food, bit like coal for when you're in a burner phase of the game. So you've got to feed that into every single machine. You've got to produce enough of it. The green cubes then could be an intermediate. They could be, you've taken, say, 3 of the spiky orange ones and 4 of the orange balls, the mash, squished them together and made green gelatinous cube. That feels like a more sensible production chain to me. But we do then see this here, which is showing us the production of the science pack. It is obviously putting in the white things. Every machine we've seen that's doing something is putting in a white powder. But it's got this here, okay? And to me, that looks very reminiscent of the alien artifacts we used to have. So I'm wondering if maybe these are alien eggs, basically. I mean, I don't think they are, if I'm honest. What I think they are is essentially the mash with a gelatinous cube squudged around it so that it becomes a circle. I think that's probably what it actually is. But yeah, I think one possibility is it could be those are alien eggs, effectively. I don't think that it is. I think it's just those two stuck together, basically. But from an ingredient point of view, this therefore looks fairly simple. So how complex these are to make, I don't know. But we are literally getting the white stuff, the powder, which we know is certainly made from the mash, plus these green spheroidy ones, and they are directly making the science pack. So it's literally a 2-ingredient recipe. Of course, as I say, we don't know how complex it is to produce your gelatinous footballs, basically. But say those are interestingly similar to, say, a tadpole egg, or something like that, where it's an amphibious creature and it's got the animal in the middle of it, and then it's got a gelatinous sort of cube around it. Gelatinous sort of thing around it, but as I say, it does also look like a mash with a green gelatinous cube around it, basically. I guess, and maybe it isn't the case, but I'm guessing that the reason for showing this video, that I couldn't really understand why we're being shown it in a way, is that where we can harvest trees by hand and by robot, the robot harvesting of the trees maybe doesn't give the products, that you can use robots to get rid of them, but that it's only via the agricultural tower and maybe by hand that you can get the fruits and seeds. Because otherwise, I mean, I assume they don't have a spoilage while they're on the plant. That they only start spoiling once they are harvested. Maybe the plants have a lifetime. Maybe the plants die after a while. Perhaps that's a thing. But it feels like a cheat would be effectively to run along as the engineer, planting a load of seeds, wait for it all to grow, and then get your bots to harvest it all, and that they could dump them straight into where you need them. So I'm assuming that you can't harvest them via bots, or if you do harvest them, what you're effectively doing is just, clear cutting it. You can't get the fruits out of it, or maybe you get far less fruits or no seeds or something like that. So it makes it valueless. Because otherwise, as I say, it just feels like you could run around planting a gigantic forest of these things, let it all grow, and then at the point you needed science packs, harvest it all with bots. That's instantaneous, and off you go. Bang, you've got a load of science packs. So I'm guessing they're trying to stop you doing that by making it effectively pointless to harvest them with bots. Otherwise, that would seem to be a lot quicker than this harvesting thing. I guess the next thing to speculate about is that we have 100% confirmation that we have carbon fibre. On this Friday Facts, we saw this image here. Let's see if I can zoom in on that effectively. It's not really expanding, is it? This here, I speculated, and I think a lot of people have speculated, I wasn't original with that as such, but that this was carbon fibre. So I think this is what we will probably be making. When it talks about the, the production of carbon fibre, I think that's, the confirmation that that's what that is, which is kind of interesting. I mean, I'm kind of assuming that that is the reason, in a sense, for coming to Gleba, that it gives you these important intermediates and that Bioflux is somehow really important for the game. I'm not yet seeing the, wow, this is amazing, this is why you would need to come to Gleba first, because it's great that there's a way of making plastics and other things without oil. I really like that side of it. The introduction of the spoilage mechanics, I'm wondering how quick the mod will be that removes spoilage mechanics, or sets it to infinite effectively. But the fact that they've then introduced that makes this more troublesome from a using it on other planets point of view, because if, as I'm correct, you can't grow these plants anywhere other than Gleba, that means you can only use this recipe really on Gleba. I guess you could stick a load of these in space platforms and send them to another planet and use them there. Why would you bother doing that? Because if they have a spoilage time and you are turning them into something that doesn't spoil, one of the things that I'm hoping with the spoilage is that effectively if something is at really close to lifetime, you can turn it all into plastic and plastic never goes off. And so this is a great way of getting some of those in you could build a red circuit factory here, sort of type of thing, assuming we can get copper and iron. And that would be like the best way, in a sense, of avoiding spoilage. That's what I'm hoping. That's why I'm a little optimistic on this, that I'm not going to hate it, because it's about coming up with a way of like picking out the just spoiling items, making plastic out of them, and that's then permanently safe, as it were. And plastic obviously has loads and loads and loads of uses, and that's worth shipping around your interplanetary system. So that's my sort of hope. That's why I'm not too worried about this, even though it does match up with the I would hate survival mechanics I was saying last week. But yeah, so what I'm wondering is that this feels like the only real place you would want to be doing it is Gleba. Whereas we saw that the Foundry, the EMP, feel like buildings, because they're using Nauvis recipes, but in different ways, that you would want to be sending them around the solar system, using Foundries on Aquila and on Nauvis, and using Foundries on Fargora and EMPs on Volcanus. That feels like they're set up for doing that. This thing, with its reliance on these organic products that have a shelf life, feels like it's trapped on Gleba. The flip side to that is that it might also work as an advanced, chemical plant. That you can also, I mean, it kind of says it doesn't though, but you could also give it the regular Nalvis recipe for plastic, feed it coal and oil, so it doesn't have a fluid connection, and that it would make plastic using the normal method, because there's no mention here of the productivity bonus either. There's no, and it comes with a 50% productivity bonus, and you can put 12 modules in it. There's none of that. It's not said any of that. Now, that could just be because maybe they haven't decided, that it's still work in progress from that point of view. But it feels like this is just going to be a bioreactor version or assembler machine that's only useful for doing this process. Now, that's good in some ways because it forces you to do a lot of different stuff on this planet and not just cheat it by taking it away and giving it normal recipes and using the prod bonus to do it all. So I'm intrigued to see whether there is anything like that. Does it have a built-in prod bonus? Does it have more module slots? Can it be given other recipes other than the Gleba recipes? I'm probably fine with it either way. I don't mind. But it's interesting we've suddenly got this other planet that operates very, very differently to how all the other planets work, that its exclusive machines have no use whatsoever elsewhere. Now, I mean, of course, technically we got that with the lightning thing on Falgora, but, there is the hope that maybe Aquila does have lightning on it and stuff like that, and so they would be transferable. But yeah, it is feeling like perhaps Gleba's really its own sort of trapped self-system, basically. It's entirely self-contained, and you can suck out of it, plastics and sulfur, and not that you'd need sulfur because we've got loads of ways of producing that now, but, bits and pieces. Like, this is going to be maybe the perfect way of making rocket fuel, and that it's better, maybe, to fill platforms with rocket fuel and send them around the galaxy, for Aquila, for example, maybe, rather than build them locally. Because what I was expecting was, we would be replacing or having an upgraded version of the oil production, and that it would use this bio stuff, but that would be transferable, that you would be able to replace the oil production on other planets with bio production. And that's why I was speculating about algae and things like that, because they feel like things that you would be able to self-contain, and it would have, infinite. Algae just grows and grows and grows. It doesn't die off, sort of thing. But yeah, I was not expecting a shelf life mechanic. That was a really. Sorry, I've gone really rambly there. How the heck I'm going to title that one in the edit, I don't know. But what I was also going to point out is that we have something called Bioflux. Now, what the heck is Bioflux? Do we think Bioflux is the green cubes? One of the reasons that term is interesting is because flux has kind of a fairly open but fairly specific meaning. It tends to mean flow related things. So I'm not going to get into it, but you can look it up if you want. If you look at things like it's a term that's used quite a lot in mathematics, but that then implies that it's usually like a medium, a way of transporting things or flow and things like that. And so you would tend to expect something called a bioflux to be like a fluid, basically. And as I say, none of these machines appear to be doing anything that looks like a fluid. However, this thing does look like it's gelatinous. So is that the bioflux? Maybe is that some kind of super intermediate, and that the way of making a lot of stuff is basically to squelch this bioflux around anything else, that when you encase whatever it is in this bioflux, it allows you to transform it into anything you want to. Is that sort of what they're kind of getting at, that it's a all-purpose intermediate for biomaterials? I don't know. It's a very interesting word to use. And yeah, I suppose on that point as well, I'm interpreting nutrients to be the white powder stuff, whether that comes out of the other tree or whether that's something you always produce, because what it seems to be doing here, as I say, is like taking some nutrient and the orange mash stuff and making more nutrient. So I think that's a, you put 4 in and you get 10 out type of recipe going on with the nutrient, and that you always want to be keeping a belt accessible by all of your bioplants that has nutrient on it, and that's quite an important thing to do, and that it's then these orange and green and spiky orange things that you actually use as the proper material. It's just that this is just a calcite style intermediate helper product that doesn't become anything itself, but is used in every single bioreactor. Okay, so this is the last one I'm going to speculate about. There is loads that we could talk about here, but as usual, I need to balance practicality of edit and voice lasting. In this section here on the science pack, it does state that there are some items and recipes with spoilable ingredients which need to be crafted on different planets. So on top of optimizing the production chain, it'll also be meaningful to make a fast space platform to deliver them. Now, that could obviously just be referring to the science pack itself. I don't think it is from the way that it's written. The way I'm interpreting it to mean is that the Bioflux, as the best probably example, is used in a recipe that's used on another planet to produce a different thing, but you can only produce that different. You can only do that on a different planet to Gleba. In other words, I think this is an Aquilo thing, basically. But to use buildings we know about, that if you wanted to make, let's just say tungsten carbide, it's not going to be that. That's just a silly example. But if you wanted to make tungsten carbide, you need Bioflux. I say that's why it's daft. You wouldn't. But you would need Bioflux, and you'd need to take Bioflux to Volcanus, because that recipe, like we've seen with some of the other recipes, is locked to Volcanus. You can only make it there because of the pressure or whatever the excuse is. And so you need to transport Bioflux to Volcanus in order to make, tungsten carbide. Say you won't, but whatever it is. And that actually that's an Aquila thing, that you need to move it to Aquila, but you've got to get it there in time. And so you need a super fast platform that's just going to blast there and drop off the Bioflux and make whatever the thing is. I'm also interpreting it to mean that there are spoilable ingredients on different planets. Is that what that's saying? Tell me if you think this is saying differently. In other words, the reverse. And I say again, I think it's Aquila based, but that if you wanted to make something on Gleba or Fulgora, I say it's probably got to involve Gleba because that's the spoiling planet, but that involves the thing you're taking from another planet. Say the other way round, you're taking tungsten carbide to Gleba in order to make something on Gleba. That tungsten carbide, again, it's not going to be that, but that thing has a spoilage as well, and that it's something else on other planets that has spoilage time, and you've got to make the end product with it on Gleba, so you've got to get it to Gleba super fast. I think that's what it's saying. I think that's my correct interpretation, that there are essentially other spoilable items on other planets. So I think that's Aquila. I don't think Fulgora and Volcanus will be doing that. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. The other possibility is fish. So I think we've had confirmation finally that fish is still required in a Spidertron, but it's not required in a rocket turret. So effectively a rocket turret has got a fish and 4 exoskeletons on it, and that becomes a Spidertron. So the very last line about bringing your half-spoiled fish to the market of opinions could be a subtle reference to the fact that in order to build your Spidertrons, which maybe have to be built on Gleba, I mean, I think we already know that they're being moved off of Nauvis, but that they still need a fish brain. There's no fish on Gleba. You've got to get fish to Gleba, so you've got to stick them on a rocket, poor fish, and get them there, otherwise they spoil, and that fish are no longer an infinitely lasting exhaust. I mean, that would 100% make sense, wouldn't it? Because it's a fish, it's not going to live. It was always weird that you could just stick them in a chest and they would live forever, because they're alive when you put them in, a Spidertron. We're absolute monsters, aren't we? But that to me is the only other logical thing, that there's a fish, that you can, that you still need fish, sorry, for Spidertron, and that it has a spoilage now. I do wonder if that then means that, like, because I mean, we know that some, stuff doesn't always inherit the spoilage, but if you make a Spidertron with a 90% spoiled fish, does that Spidertron end up as being a dumb Spidertron, and it'll just when you give it an order, it might follow it, it might not do, or it might do something completely random. That'd be quite funny, but I can't see anything like that happening. But yeah, that'd be quite having your pet dumb Spidertron that sort of follows you around and sort of gets lost and stuff like that would be quite amusing. But I say I can't see them doing anything like that. But yeah, that's my other thought, is that it's really about Aquila. It's a hint at something on Aquila is going to use, because I'm interpreting. I've said this in my speculation video. Aquila to me is the end game planet, the end of the game planet. It's going to bring all these mechanics together. All you need. Everything intermediate that you can produce in order to do stuff on Aquila. Aquila itself is just this barren rock. It has something there that we really need for some reason, but it doesn't have iron, it doesn't have copper, it doesn't have anything organic, it doesn't have oil. Maybe it's got uranium. That was one of the things I was speculating, so that that's its one thing, that it's the only place with uranium as well. But everything needs to be brought to Aquila. Some of it's going to spoil, some of it's complicated recipes that you got to make and that weigh a ton, and so you've got to have huge platforms that can carry a load and super fast platforms to deliver it just in time. And it's all about managing all of the systems, mastering them, so that on Aquila you can do the thing that you need to do to win the game and to do infinite science. So to me, having it something to do with spoilage, given that's the big mechanic here on Aquila, makes sense. But what that would be, I really don't know. I hope you enjoyed today's Friday Facts video and might consider coming back for another one. If you'd like to chat about the latest Factorio Friday Facts, then you can find me live streaming Factorio every weekend over on my Twitch channel @Trismegistus. Thanks for watching. Cheers. The maximum freshness and mash.